Chapter 3. Continued. It was on a weekend in Mexico that they decided to take over the world. Why not the universe?
Your ambition is disgusting, Joseph said,
lying naked on the balcony because he liked the feel of the rain, which was falling heavily. Well then, we'll be modest. Where shall we start?
Here.
Not practical. We have no base of operations.
Tegucigalpa, then. We secretly twist all the programs of the computers to follow our every command. Then we cut off everybody's salaries until they surrender.
They laughed. It was a game. But a game they played seriously enough to do research. They would hunt for possible weaknesses, places that the systems would be subverted. They also worked to get an overview of the system, to understand how it all fit together. Joseph knew his way around the government library in Mexico, and they both spent time punching up readouts on the establishment of Tegucigalpa only 300-odd years before.
The thing's relatively new.
Half the functions have only been installed in the last 10 years. 10 years!
And most other planets have been fully computerized for centuries.
You're too down on Earth, Kieran chided him, poring over minutes of meetings, which were so heavily edited at their level of clearance that it was hard to get anything coherent out of them at all. But it was not in Mexico that they found the scam. It was at home. Kieran had been reading a book on demographics, one that she had only been able to skim at Princeton. It set norms for age distributions on a planet. She found the information fascinating, especially the variations that depended on local employment, climate, and relative wealth. She amused herself by plotting the demographic distributions of ages for Earth, based on the easily obtained statistics on employment and the economy. Then she took a few minutes of break time at work to check her figures. They were wrong. From birth to retirement age at 80, her figures were actually quite good. It was from 80 to 100 that things didn't work. Not enough people were dying at those ages. In fact, she realized, almost no one was dying, compared to the normal mortality rates. And then, from 100 to 110, they died like flies, so that from 110 on, the statistics were normal. Surely someone would have noticed this before, Kieran thought. Certainly the Earth would have gained a reputation for unusually low mortality rates. It had to be common knowledge. The food distribution must certainly be affected by it, and pension expenses must be unusually high. Scientists must be trying to discover the reason for the phenomenon. And yet she had never heard of it at all. In the programming manuals they had looked at in the library in Mexico, Kieran had found some little-known program that allowed an operator to check a program rather than use it to find and process data. Kieran talked to Joseph about it that night, which they spent in his place because it was larger and had room for both of them, without having to petition for extra furniture, which would have made their arrangement public knowledge. I've checked my figures again and again, and they're not wrong.
Well, the only way to solve it is to go kill some old people, I guess, Joseph said, reading a 23rd century mystery, in translation, of course.
Joseph, it's wrong. Something's wrong.
Kieran, he said, impatient but trying not to sound like it, this is a game we were playing. We really don't have any responsibility for the whole world, just for dead people and the not quite dead, and then just as numbers.
I want to find out if the figures on death are right or not.
Joseph closed the book. Kieran, the figures on death are right. That's my job, isn't it? I do death.
Then check and see if my figures are right.
He checked. Her figures were right. Your figures are right. Maybe the book's wrong.
It's been the Bible of demographics for 3 centuries. Someone would have noticed by now.
Joseph opened the book again. Damned Earth. The people don't even know when to die.
You must have noticed it, Kieran said. You must have seen that most of your deaths were grouped between 100 and 110.
I've never noticed anything like that. We deal with individuals, not the aggregate. We terminate files, you know. We don't watch trends.
I just want to check some things. You know that program we found on checking entries, the error finder?
Yeah.
Remember the numbers?
Kieran, you're not being very good company.
Together they figured out the numbers and codes. Kieran left for a few minutes and verified them on the local library terminal by hunting up her last library use. The program worked fine. It was quite simple, in fact, which was why they were able to remember it. The next day, during a break, Kieran punched in a date of entry query on the solitary death in Kwangyang District. She figured a single death would be simpler, would give her a single readout. What should have flashed on her screen was the date of entry, the name of the operator who entered the death information, the vital statistics entered on that date on that person, and the operation number. Instead, what flashed on was the bright "Restricted" sign, and what sounded was a loud buzzer at Warvel's desk. Everyone looked up immediately, watched as Warvel got up quickly, looking alarmed.
Karen knew that on his desk her area was flashing. Sure enough, when he located the culprit, he slammed his hand on the desk and charged furiously over to her. "What the bloody hell are you doing, Karen?" he bawled as he came over. What should she tell him? That she was playing a game of plotting to take over the world? That she was double-checking the figure because they didn't jibe with her own calculations? "I don't know," she said, letting herself sound as surprised and flustered as she felt. "I was just playing with the thing, just punching in random numbers and words. I don't know." "Which random numbers and words?" he demanded, leaning over her terminal. "I don't remember," she lied. "It was just whimsical." "It was just stupid," he said back to her. "There are programs here that if you just randomly and whimsically happened to stumble on them, they'd freeze the whole operation until the stinking police came to find out who's trying to jury the system. You understand? This system is foolproof, but we don't need any extra fools trying to prove it." She apologized profusely, but as he returned, unmollified, to his desk, she realized that he had seemed not so much angry as afraid. And the others in the room, as Warville returned to his desk, looked at her sullenly, angrily, and also fearfully. What had she done? "Karen," Warville said, as she left the office at the end of the working day. "Karen, your 4-month report is coming up in a few days. I'm afraid I'm going to have to give you a negative report." Karen was stunned. "Why?" she asked. "You haven't been working. You've been obviously loafing. It's bad for morale, and it's downright dishonest." "When have I loafed?" she asked. A negative report, now on her first job, especially one this easy, could destroy her hope of a government career. "I have complaints from 14 people. Every single person in this office except you and me, Karen. They're tired of watching you play games. Studying up on ancient history and playing computer games, when you should be trying to help old people cope with inflation and the fluctuations of the economy. We aren't here for fun, Karen. We're here to help people. Do you understand?" She nodded. "That's what I'm trying to do." "I'll give you a negative report, but I won't fire you unless there's any more trouble. You understand? 3 years of perfect work and you get the negative report taken off your record. It's something you can live down, if you just stick to business in the future." She left. At home, Joseph was appalled. 14 complaints? That's what he said. "Karen, you could have an intimate sexual relationship with a lamp in the middle of the lunchroom and you'd have a hard time getting 3 complaints. What do they have against me?" she asked. Joseph's face grew somber. "Me," he said. "What?" "Me. You had problems enough. Adding me to them. Do you know how many women have tried to get me into bed? There's something about a known homosexual that's irresistible to a certain kind of woman. They regard him as a challenge, me as a challenge. And then you come along, and suddenly we're spending weekends together? The ones that aren't jealous are probably revolted to think of what perverted things I must be making you do." "It isn't you." "Then what is it?" "They're afraid." "Of what?" "How should I know?" Joseph got up from the bed, went to the door, leaned on it. "Karen, it's me. We've got to stop. When you leave tonight, that's it." He sounded sincere. She wondered why even the thought of leaving him and not coming back made her feel as if she were falling from someplace very high. "I'm not leaving tonight," she said. "I'm leaving in the morning." "No, for your own good." She laughed incredulously. "My own good?" He looked at her from the door, his face very serious. "My own good is to stay right here." He shook his head. "Do you really mean this?" she asked, unbelieving. "Just like that, you decide I'm supposed to go because you think it'll be better for me?" "Sounds pretty stupid, doesn't it?" he said. And they started laughing, and he came back to the bed, and suddenly they weren't laughing, just holding each other, and realizing that this wasn't something they could simply end when it became inconvenient. "Joseph," she said. "Mm-hmm." His face was buried in her hair, and he was sucking on a strand of it. "Joseph, I frightened them. They're afraid of something." "You're a pretty mean-looking woman." "There's something pretty funny about it. Why should death entry information be restricted?" They couldn't think of a reason. And so the next day at lunch, Joseph had a sheet of paper, something little used in the computer center, and on it were 10 names and 10 numbers. "Can you use this?" he asked. "What are they?" "Dead people. Today's first entries. They should be in your computer by now since I punched them all in. That's their identification numbers, and date of entry is a few hours ago. That's basically all the date of entry code would have told you anyway. Can you do anything with them?" Karen didn't dare bring the paper with her to the office. Anything as unusual as paper would attract attention, and that was not what she needed. so she memorized the first 3 and left the list in the lavatory on the floor below. On her first break, she came down, but instead of getting 3 more names, she went to Joseph. "Are you sure you copied these down correctly?" Joseph looked at the names and numbers, punched them into his terminal, and the vitals showed up. All definitely dead. "On my terminal," she said, "they're still very much alive." Joseph got up from his terminal, and she followed him to the corridor, where Joseph spoke softly. "We should have guessed it immediately. It's a scam, Karen. They're paying those pensions to somebody, but not to these people, because they're dead." Karen leaned against the wall. "Do you know how much money that is?" Joseph was not impressed. "Come on," he said. "Where?" "Out of this building, immediately." He started pulling her along. She came willingly enough, but completely confused. "Where are we going?" He wouldn't answer. They did not go to either of their rooms. Instead, they headed for the airport, which was on the eastern edge of the complex. "This isn't the time for a weekend in Mexico," she said. "Just punch in sick." They stood before the ticket terminal, and she did as he said, using her office code. Then he stood to the terminal and punched out 2 tickets for himself, charging them to his own account. "I can pay for my own," she said. He didn't answer. He just took the tickets, and they boarded the flit, headed for Marrakech. It was when they were in the flight that he finally began explaining. "It isn't just your office, Kieran," he said. "It's mine, too. This thing has to involve a lot of people, and death and disbursements and pensions, who knows where else. If they caught you on a simple query, they surely have the program to notice that you just queried the names of 3 people whose deaths were registered today, and that immediately afterward I queried the same names. The computer knows that somebody knows there is a discrepancy, and I don't know how long we'd live if we stayed there." "They wouldn't do anything violent, would they?" Karen asked. Joseph only kissed her and said, "Wherever you grew up, Karen, must be paradise." "Where are we going?" she asked again. "To report it, of course. Let the police handle it. Let Babylon do it. They have the power to freeze everything and everyone there while they investigate. We don't have any power at all." "What if we're wrong?" "Then we go looking for jobs about 1 billion lights away from here." "Here." "Not practical. We have no base of operations." "Tegucigalpa, then. We secretly twist all the programs of the computers to follow our every command. Then we cut off everybody's salaries until they surrender." They laughed. It was a game. But a game they played seriously enough to do research. It was on a weekend in Mexico that they decided to take over the world. Why not the universe? "Your ambition is disgusting," Joseph said, lying naked on the balcony because he liked the feel of the rain, which was falling heavily. "Well then, we'll be modest. Where shall we start?" "The thing's relatively new. Half the functions have only been installed in the last 10 years. 10 years! And most other planets have been fully computerized for centuries." "You're too down on Earth," Karen chided him, poring over minutes of meetings. They would hunt for possible weaknesses, places that the systems would be subverted. They also worked to get an overview of the system, to understand how it all fit together. Joseph knew his way around the government library in Mexico, and they both spent time punching up readouts on the establishment of Tegucigalpa only 300-odd years before. Chapter 3. Continued.